are living a story right now, a story that holds power if you access it strategically. Remember your story as a kid? What did you want to do when you grew up? At 5, I was clear. I wanted to be a grocery store dancer. Okay, I see those befuddled looks. Well, I'd never seen a grocery store dancer before. I had strong logic on why grocery store dancers should exist and why I should be one. Even at 5, I knew people had to get groceries, so how much better if they also got to experience dance. And I loved to dance. As a kid, I found it tragically boring to just walk around. So I pranced on my tiptoes everywhere and earned the nickname Tammy Toes. Whew. And in the grocery store, I would practice my heart out. And over the loudspeaker in my head, I would hear Tamara Park is presenting the Swan Lake on aisle 5, the cookie aisle. And so that's how my work story began to take form. Work would be where I added value and had fun. And then in the tender years of elementary school, something threw off that dream. But by high school, I was clear again and more realistic. I'd be a war correspondent. I'd go to war zones and humanize them. And work would be about adding value, not necessarily having fun, but adventure and connecting with others. And then that got thrown off. Whew, my work story has not gone like I thought it would. There's been these zigs and zags, from nonprofit leader to television director to tech startup founder to executive coach and consultant. There's been disruption after disruption, and some of them have been brutal. I suspect your work story has had some twists and turns too. So here's the question for you. How do you live a great story at work, no matter what comes your way? Well, I've had the privilege of working on 5 continents, from the Amazon to Zanzibar, and I've discovered 3 ways that your story at work holds power. Such power it can ground you and expand you, no matter the hardest things that come your way. And first, it begins with you getting curious about your own story. Technology is great for so many things, but it can never tell you who you truly are. So you need to get as curious about your own story as you are with your favorite Netflix series or novel, because your story holds power. I observed this during my years of interviewing, whether it was a celebrity or a survivor of sex trafficking. There'd be this moment in the interview when the person across from me caught a glimpse of the distinctiveness of their story, that they had experiences and insights that could help others, that their story mattered. And when that happened, I could see it. The person across from me, their posture would straighten, more confidence would infuse their voice. Their whole demeanor shifted when they accessed the power of their own story. See, neuroscience tells us that when we reflect on our story, we grow new neural pathways in our brain. So getting curious about your own story at work isn't simply gaining more self-knowledge. It has the capacity to rewire your brain, making you more resilient, adaptable, and emotionally healthy. It's amazing. So practically, how do you get curious about your story at work? It begins by you believing you're living a story, one that matters, that your minutes and months and years and different job titles and to-do lists aren't random. They're a part of this work narrative where you're the hero in your story. You have agency in your work story. So who are you as the hero? I'm curious, why have you done what you've done? Why are you doing what you're doing? I would love to hear your story. I'll share a little bit more of mine. I mentioned that I went from dreaming of being a grocery store dancer to desiring to be a war correspondent. What happened in the middle of that? Well, here's what happened. One Sunday when I was 8, on our way to church, our parents stopped by a local prison. Now, they were working in social justice, so I just went with it. And somehow we were able to take a gentleman who was incarcerated, I'll name him Tony, to church and then out to a mediocre steakhouse. I asked Tony just questions. I was a bit anxious and perfectionist, but definitely a curious kid. So I asked him, what do you want to do when you get out, Tony? What's your life like? What is prison like? I was so curious about his world. And then this magical thing happened. Tony honored my questions. Tony shared about growing up in a world that was very different than mine. And then Tony leaned in and got animated as he started to share with me not only what he wanted to do when he got out, but who he wanted to help. Tony had dreams, and he wanted to share them with me. And as Tony shared his story, it was as if the secret code in me got unlocked of who I was and what I wanted to do. I knew I needed to hear more stories like Tony. And I loved it when I asked a question that made someone lean in and light up. Well, that secret code in me getting unlocked has sent me on journeys around the world, from interviewing boy band members to training EU leaders working on counterterrorism on the power of story. And I've needed to go back to that little moment with Tony again and again, especially in the big disappointments with work. When has that secret code gotten unlocked in you? Have you forgotten it? Do you need to figure it out again, or maybe for the first time? See, there are stakes to not knowing your story. You get disconnected from who you are and what you have to offer at work, especially when the hardest disruptions come. Get curious about your story at work so you can get clear on what you have to offer, because your story holds power. Secondly, get connected to other people's stories at work. No great stories lived in isolation. I discovered that when I was producing the first television series I ever pitched. I trekked from Mozambique to Morocco, interviewing African leaders. And one of the first leaders I interviewed was Adelina. Adelina was living in a trash dump community in Maputo. She shared with me when she was on the brink of dying of AIDS. She stared into her children's faces and realized if there was any hope of their survival, she was going to have to invite others into her story. So she set out to meet other moms in that community and found out many of them were also dying of AIDS. So she brought them together and they started to care for each other's children as they'd go off and get their medications. Adelina built such a strong community, they ended up having higher survival rates of AIDS than in Western countries. Interview after interview of these leaders, they embodied this African proverb that says, if you want to travel fast, travel alone. But if you want to travel far, travel with others. My interpretation, community creates capacity. So practically, how do you get connected to other people's stories at work? Well, it begins with you believing that they are living a story that matters where they're the hero. You see them as the hero. The next time a colleague or someone who works for you comes and shares an experience or an idea, and your impulse is to jump in and share yours or critique theirs, pause. Remember, they're the hero in their story. And then say these 3 simple words, tell me more. And when they do, listen, not just with your ears, but also with your eyes. See them. And then ask a good question. And when you do, you begin to hone the skills of curiosity, deep listening, and insightful questions. The trifecta of connection. Guess what happens when you get good at that? People actually feel truly seen and heard. So much so that you can shift each other's physiology. You can release a neurochemical called oxytocin that bonds you, makes you more empathetic, so you both have a better story at work. There are stakes to not getting connected to others at work. Frankly, you're less productive and effective, but also you risk potentially profound loneliness. So get connected to other people's stories at work because their stories hold power. And finally, get captivated by a larger story. Technology can assemble meaning for you, but it can't generate it. You are given the gift of making meaning. And when you tie your story to a larger story, it has the capacity to ground you and expand you when those hard disruptions come your way. I've yet to become a grocery store dancer. Yeah. Tammy Toes has never taken the stage, and I didn't become a war correspondent. But I am so grateful for this story that I'm getting to live, where I'm getting to add value and have adventure and connect with others. My life has been so enriched by those who've entered my story, from Adelina to Tony to the EU leaders working on counterterrorism, to the executives I work with now. My deep joy, my bigger story is helping others live a great story at work. What's the larger story captivating you? There is one out there for you. And it begins with you believing that you're living a story at work that matters and that you're the hero. And then you see others at work as the heroes. And imagine if you, as this crowd of heroes, came together. What problem might you be able to solve? What innovation could you come up with? And imagine this, if we all committed to living a great story at work, how might we change our work cultures? How might we transform our world? Because our stories hold power. Thank you.